Hi, Noor. Thank you for the warm introduction. It was fantastic to hear from Sarah as well. Hi everybody. My name is Irina. I'm heading the DHL Innovation Center and the whole innovation drive for Middle East and Africa region for DHL. We just opened actually end of October, so we are kind of a new kid on the block, and I hope that all those partnerships that we are now building, right, will help us to really connect with the ecosystem of startups in the region. So I'm here to talk about how you can work with the big MNCs such as DHL. And I have to say, personally, right, I've invested twice in startups. I should have probably been on some of those webinars before. They didn't become unicorns. And then really listening to Sarah just now, I was like, well, if I would have that kind of view, I probably would not have done it and saved some time and money. But I'm on the other side, right? And when Microsoft asked me to talk about it, I was really thinking what would be valuable, right? So if you Google startups working with MNCs, there is a ton of information. There are books, there are articles, there are recorded sessions. But most of them, what I found, are talking really about the cooperation models and kind of different ways you can build up that relationship. But there's not much advice of how you can actually have that first contact, how you can get your foot in the door, how you can get that first POC with MNC, because that first POC is also quite valuable for you in your venture capital finding, right? And in all your ways to really build up the reputation. And I can see that a lot of VCs are looking at startups that have at least one successful POC with a reputable company, and they're much higher on the radar. So that's why today I decided to talk really about that first engagement, that first POC, and give you hopefully very practical tips of how and what you can do before that engagement, during, and after. So let's start with before first. And that's really echoes what Sarah was talking about as well, right? My first piece of advice, pick your investors really wisely, right? So make sure that you are on the same page with your investors. What we see quite a lot that a lot of VCs are pushing for quick growth, right? Sales first and foremost, and not always looking and concerned with the product quality. And I would say that product quality, especially if you are in the business of physical products, right? So it's not a software that you can alter, right, or send updates. But if you give that physical product to a customer, it's out of your control, right? They're using it. And if you are not putting your time, right, and money into ensuring and improving product quality, in case you scale very fast, it will become a very big and fast flop, right? So make sure that you're really on the same page with your investors, and they see it that way as well, right? And really work with the investors that see it that way. So let's say you've done that, or maybe you are self-funded, right? You have something that you're ready to pilot, right, with a company. So you really need to find that ambassador within the company, right? And a lot of advice is like, oh, you always have to talk to the C-suite. Well, like, let's be realistic, right? In a company like DHL, talking to the C-suite executives, to our board members, unlikely a lot of people will have that access. Well, I don't talk to the board of directors on a weekly or even monthly basis. Sometimes I do. So you need to find that ambassador on the level of a manageable level, right? The country manager, site manager, and you should also have a decent site or department, right? An operation that is decent enough to really have that volume representation for your pilot, right? So you have that ambassador. The next step is really understand the true need of the company, right? Don't try to pitch or to sell the features of your product, but rather how you are going to solve the problem, right? Or of the company, or of that particular investment ambassador, of that department, right? I hear a lot of startup pitches that are so in love with the idea, and it might be a great idea, right? And might be fantastic features of the product, but it's hard for me to relate. How does it actually, right, help me to improve anything now, right, in the way we do things, right? Either customer experience or operational efficiency, whatever it is, right? So really focus on the true need, on the problem that you are trying to solve, rather than on the features of your solution, of your invention. So let's say that you have that right connection, you're ready to go, the company right is ready to step into a first POC with you. We usually have quite a bit of paperwork that you have to do, right? And I would say all MNCs do, right? So things like code of conduct, IT security checks, it's important stuff, right? And you really need to put time and effort to make sure that you go through it, you understand what the corporation requires from you, and follow those rules, right? They're not there to kind of make your life more difficult, but it's things that are extremely important for us, and that's how we manage all our relationships and partnerships. And please do accept the NDA, right? I had a few startups that were kind of very scared to sign anything, right? And not really signing the NDA. Well, I'm not ready to disclose, right, my operational issues if you're not doing that, right? Talking about NDAs, right? What is also important, just before you start your first engagement, really then agree what you're allowed to talk about, right? Make sure that that after you had the POC, especially if it is successful, you are actually allowed, right, to talk about it. You're allowed to put press releases. You're allowed to publish it on your web pages, talk to investors about it. Because if you don't agree it beforehand, it can be the case that right when you come later to the final stages, the company would say, well, NDA signed, you're not allowed to talk about it at all, right? So make sure that you think about it in advance. And that also means that I think getting a decent legal advice is a good thing at that point of time, not to kind of trying to outsmart the MNC, but really also not to be afraid, right, with all that kind of paperwork that comes with starting, right, this engagement. And very often that paperwork is not even driven by MNC only, but by kind of requirements on a certain field, right? We had one pilot here done here in Dubai, right, that before we actually entered into being able to do a pilot, right, we had to have like 11 different permissions gathered together with a startup, right? And in order to be able to gather those permissions, we had to have all the paperwork done between us as well, right? So that was before. So let's say all good. You're ready to do that first pilot, right? So let's look at what is important in the during phase, right? A bit less bullet points, right? That before is really opening doors is usually trickier. But when you are in your first pilot, make sure that you collect the quantitative as well as qualitative feedback. The user experience is extremely important for us as well, and I'm sure for any other big company, and not only the efficiency gains, right, that the product, right, potentially can bring, or external customer satisfaction. And I saw a number of examples, right, where the management truly believed, right, that certain type of technology would make things better, but it was very low acceptance on the shop floor for this piece of technology, and then it was kind of a no-go decision, right? Because we don't want to turn our workforce against, right, us as well, right? So we are very, at least in DHL, very receptive to the voice of the user as well, right? So make sure that you listen to that voice of the user, right? You incorporate it in your product development, but also collect the good voices, because it can help you, right, to then make it a success, right, and then basically scale up within MNC as well. A nice idea could be, if you're doing a few pilots across different customers, right, have that customer advisory board, right, where the customers can really talk about the user experience, the features, right, and get into that really collaborative approach. That would be extremely valuable for reiterations and product development. And also make sure that you scan your stakeholder landscape constantly and carefully, right? Very often, right, that one decision maker you think he is, right, or she is listening to somebody else, right? So make sure that you know who are those people that would at the end influence the decision, whether it was a great experience or not, right? And should it be a further collaboration going forward? So those are the tips for during. Let's now look at what can be and should be happening after you concluded your first pilot. So my first point, please document, right? Document your findings, the results, and help the project managers on the other side in the company, right, that you're working with to really do it, right? Because, for example, right, I might be running a pilot with a certain piece of technology here in Middle East, right? I would like to share it, right, with other regions. And if like all the burden of documentation only lies on us, right, as innovation managers or on my team, right, it's kind of that motivation of sharing is there, right, but it's kind of greatly reduced, right? So please make sure that you help your ambassador to really be your ambassador in the company, right? Um, Again, my point about product quality before scaling, right? That's an important consideration for you to make at this point of time. If your first POC was successful, right, and the MNC comes to you, say like, all right, I want to scale it up, and you're like, well, that's the dream come true, right? It's the best way to market, right? If you scale within an MNC, be really clear. Are you really ready to scale, right? I like maybe there is this 24/7 customer service support, right? 48 hours replacement of any faulty parts, right? Do you have that size of operation that can support it, right? Understand what scaling also means, right? Kind of how many solutions, devices, right? You, especially if you're looking at the physical, right, world, not software, right, world, you would need to be providing, right? And I had an example with one of the companies. Their technology was fantastic. They were also cheap for what they were doing, right? Versus the current systems, right? All great, right? Few successful POCs. Let's scale. Let's just kind of roll it out across operations globally, and then boom, right? They're not able to fulfill on that need, but we already made our teams, right, and operations very excited about that. And that then, well, we had to look for alternatives. They were actually not as great, but were able to scale with us, right? So have that honest conversation, right? That are you really ready to scale or not, right? And if you're not ready to scale at that point of time, right, work together with an MNC to understand how also you can potentially go in that cooperative, right, collaborative model, and how they can help you to build up, right, that capability to scale if they truly want you on board, right? Also, big companies, right? It's not just one single thing, right? It's usually a lot of different worlds and small and big kingdoms. So be ready to do more than one POC. So if you did something very successful in Americas, I can tell you that guys in Middle East can say like, well, but the conditions are different, right? There's different type of problems. There, people are different. It greatly helps to have a success in one part of the world with a company, but it doesn't yet mean that it's it for you, right? You might need to do more than one pilot. And then finally, right, if it's all going really great, really make sure that through your stakeholder, right, scanning, you really identify that economic buyer, that true decision maker that can really take a call to go on board you and scale you within the company. So those are my hopefully few practical pieces of advice, and I can see some questions are starting to come in. So let's probably spend the last minutes we have of that engaging hour, I hope, to really look at what you want to ask me.
Top stuff, Irina. Thank you very much for sharing that very holistic overview of how startups and corporates can work effectively. I think it's very important to have those frank conversations and to have all the processes in place to make it a very mutually beneficial stake for both parties. Right. So if we go into the questions a little bit, so an interesting one that's come up is, what would you say is the biggest pain point for startups when it comes to working with corporates, and how has this changed recently?
It's a good question, Asad, right? So I would say that the differences in cultures and speeds of making decisions, right, and ability to pivot is the biggest, right, is the biggest difference. But if I look at the last 2.5 years, right, our world learned to be agile, right, and big corporates as well really realized that this agility, right, and pivoting is essential to survival, right? So I would say that a part of all the bad things that happened because of pandemic and still happening, right? There's some good stuff as well, right? So this whole acceptance of digital tools, right, and also acceleration of decision making, right, and understanding that you need to really start being more agile and need to take decisions, right, on the go and not plan something beginning of the year and just stick to it without any pivoting, right? So that's, I think, where startups and corporates are coming closer together, but it's not yet still fully there. And I would say that startups really need to understand and appreciate and not get frustrated, right, with a slower decision making, right, and kind of slower rate of acceptance to new ideas, and help probably corporates to understand the whole innovation approach and kind of take those people they work with on the journey together.
And it's very interesting that you mentioned that it goes back to the old Darwin saying about adapting and pivoting, and we saw that firsthand, and we continue to see that very much so in contemporary times. So another interesting one that comes to mind is, obviously, over the course of your time with DHL, you must have had the chance to work with multiple startups across different functions. What would you say would be an example of one that stood out to you as something of a success story, without any naming and shaming, of course?
Oh, success stories is great, right? So success stories we can share, right? The naming and shaming is a bit of a problem, right? um, so I'd say, like, if I look at recent years, our supply chain division, right, together with the innovation centers as well, right, started to work with Locus Robotics. It's a company that really works in the space of AMRs, right, fulfillment centers, and onboarded, right, to do few pilots, right, then really kind of work with the company on product development, better tuning, and now we are buying thousands and thousands of those robots. So it's kind of starting from really small pilots and then having that collaborative approach to learn from their first implementations, right, and giving also from local side, right, giving that security to us that they are listening, they're receptive, right, and that we can really work with them in a partnership way, right? So now that's basically they. I can't call them startup anymore. I think they're probably soon to be to really become, yeah, hopefully one of the unicorns as well, partially because of all those great accelerations within, right, one MNC.
Awesome. And there's a very interesting one that's come up from the audience. So someone has asked, in your experience, is it possible to define KPIs at the pilot stage that, if achieved, would guarantee rollout of the product for the startup?
It's a good one, right? Well, in any case, you should always define the KPIs, right, to really measure the success, right? If you don't do that, right, it's kind of, it's just a playing with the solutions, with the technologies. Whether it would guarantee you or not scaling up, right, it will help it, but I would not yet say that you can put it in the contract, right? If this and this achieved, that's halas, you're given that multi-million contract, right? I don't think any MNC would go for it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't define the KPIs, right? Because if you don't, right, then you don't know what is the discussion, right? How do you assess whether it's a success or not, right? And if you think about how head of operations, head of customer service think, right? They're not excited about just technology or solution because it's great, right? They're excited about it if it helps them to improve the efficiency, right? To improve customer satisfaction rates, to reduce time, to reduce effort, open new potential right markets. So that's and that's important to really, as I said, right? It starts from the start, right, where you understand what is the true pain point you're trying to solve with your solution, with your idea. What's the value you bring, and then measure that, right?
Definitely. It's always a bit of a fine line when it comes to KPIs and metric setting, because you do run the temptation of overdoing it, but at the same time, you want to get the relevant ones that all the stakeholders will have some value derived from. Just going back to the earlier question, so you mentioned about a startup that had a more enjoyable experience working with DHL. On the flip side of that coin, I know we talk a lot about the glamour and the success stories, but was there one that maybe didn't fare as well when it came to working with you guys, and why do you think that was the case?
Well, the few, few, not just one, I have to say, right? Um, but I just want to highlight again the importance of the point that uh, be really mindful about your product quality before you're ready to scale, right? We had one experience with an IoT provider. We love their product, right? Few more companies love their product. Kind of their investors were all about sell, right? But then with the use, right, couple of months down the road, when you really have that true experience, right, outside of just a small POC, we started to see some of the shortcomings, right? Let's put it that way, of the product. But the team was not really focused on improving the quality and not kind of putting time and effort to really listen to us as a customer or other customers for that matter, right? I kind of really more focused on quick growth, and kind of that meant eventually for us, right, that we didn't want to work with that company anymore because we knew that first of all, already our first, right, that the feedbacks are not taken into account, right, and then simply discovering that the features of the product are not as great as we initially, right, thought, and they had all the chances, right, to invest into quality, right, and kind of come up with a better version, but they didn't. So, and that's that very promising IoT company that had a lot of financial backing as well at that point of time, is not longer really a serious play on the market, right? So that's, I would say, kind of be very, very mindful of listening to the feedback, right? And if you think, right, that this feedback is not valid, you don't want to change anything, right, then just take it, make sure that you know that's probably not the company you would work with in the future, right?
Definitely. And we all have heard it in so many of the previous sessions as well, the importance of feedback and incorporating it, especially when you're in that startup space. It really plays a huge role in how you manage your relations with stakeholders and other parties as well. So another one that comes to mind, and if I can get you to put your flowchart hat on for a minute, since we talk about processes with corporates, what would be the point of contact for a startup looking to work with DHL? Could you walk us through the journey of how they first reach out to you and then all the way to the end?
Yeah. So look, yeah, the warm introductions are always great, right? But we are trying to be also open, right, to startups. We actively scout as well, right? So we sometimes reach out to companies, but it's not that easy, right, to find those the gems in the rough, at the early stage as well. So what for us, right, specifically in DHL, what I would advise you as startups to do, right, we very often partner, right, with either with startup kind of aggregators, accelerators, or companies like Microsoft. For example, we are now partnering with Microsoft on the Growth X challenge, where we put forward specific challenges. We want to look for solutions, and just keep your eyes and ears open, right, for all those, and be part of it. It's a fantastic way to get in, right? We are running from time to time our own startup challenges. Just kind of make sure you follow us on social media, right? It comes up, and also look at those specifically innovation, right, teams and divisions, right? So for example, in DHL, we have 4 innovation centers basically covering the globe, right? We are here in Middle East and Africa. There is Europe, Asia Pacific in Singapore, and Americas in Chicago, right? And there is a bunch of people that is actually sitting there. That's job is to build up the network of ecosystem of startups, understand what are the developments there. So those are really good points of contact for you as well, right? So few things, we partnerships that we do with the scouting, right, programs, go with the just come and get in touch with us in the innovation centers, right? And the really good old introductions still work, right? And also to the point of pick your investors wisely, right? If you think that DHL is the company that you want to get introduced to and be scaled with, right? When you talk to your potential investors, right? Check if they have connections in the logistics world, right? If they can be the ones introducing you as well.
Awesome. And if we could have one last question, I think, to bring the session full circle, and it was one we have always asked our speakers. If you had to give one key takeaway from this session, one paramount piece of advice that all the audience who are out there in terms of startups wanting to work with corporates, what would you pick?
I would say listen to the customer pain points, understand the pain point, understand the business of a potential customer, and sell on this and pitch on this rather than on your features.
Amazing stuff. This has been highly insightful, and I'm sure the audience have taken a lot away about how they can work as startups with corporates like yourself. So thank you for joining us today, Irina, and sharing your knowledge on this.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you, Noor. And but anytime, right? Please welcome us back. And I'm really looking forward to our collaboration in the Growth X program as well. Hopefully, we get some really great startups in that space.
Absolutely.